side, which are the growers, who are the raw material manufacturers. They are converting the seed into dry flour or wet flour, as well as shake and trim. And then also you have the processors who then take that from the growers, if the growers aren't selling it directly to the retail side, to then turn it into the various products, the oils, edibles, tinctures, and other products that come out of the marijuana plant. So it is a very focused and very detailed industry. It's very similar to the automotive industry or the healthcare industry. And that's why we always frame it in that way, because it's not just something that is illegitimate. It's not something that's just mom and pop. But in that is something where there's a tremendous amount of opportunity. And in those opportunities, that's where we at Banks & Company work with it. So I'll tell you a little bit about us. Our CEO is behind you, Lloyd Banks. He's been a friend of mine since 1997 when he was at Blue Cross and Blue Shield, and I was at the wellness plan, two competing healthcare organizations. They were the big evil empire to us at the little wellness plan, but we always were able to build good friendships, and we have worked in the space of governmental relations, policy, community engagement, economic inclusion, diversity, sales, business operations, a number of different sectors in our professional experience. And we work with clients in a number of sectors. We do work in the energy space. We work with small business clients. We work with nonprofit organizations. We also have done work in the educational space, working with school systems, as well as charter school entities and educational advocacy organizations. And we work in this sector, the commercial marijuana sector. So the first thing I want to kind of go over in our presentation tonight is just a little bit about why we're here, what led us to be here. What is the rules and structure for use, and then what's legal and illegal. So we've got 3 laws that govern the overall process for marijuana, and then 1 separate law for hemp, which is the cousin of marijuana. In the 2008, we had the Individual Patient and Caregiver Law, which is the MMA. 2016, we had the Michigan Medical Marijuana Facility and Licensing Act, which created a commercial structure. One thing you may have known in Michigan, after 2008, around 2010, a number of individual cities, Grand Rapids was one, Ann Arbor, Detroit, Flint, and a few other cities, started setting up their own rules for commercial business licensing. That's when you had provisioning, or dispensaries as they were called, and you had growers that were setting up and operating, and you even had some processors that were operating in different cities. But because the original law didn't address the regulations from a state vantage point, you had conflicting laws which required the state, as well as you had in some communities, as leadership changed and new leadership decided we're going to crack down and shut down businesses that were operating legally under city law but had no room or provision under state law and were being shut down. The state decided, well, let's set up a structure which gets to that law in 2016. And then in 2018, we have the recreational law, which we call the MRTMA. And what that did in passing was create both adult use for individual consumption, but it also at the same time created a commercial structure for licensing and rules for business and how those businesses operated. And then industrial hemp in 2018, the federal government legalized hemp as a part of the 2018 Farm Bill. And in that created opportunities and has created opportunities for people to pursue licensing as either growers or processors in the hemp sector. It's a little different in Michigan because in these 3 laws, all of the day-to-day activities are governed by the Marijuana Regulatory Agency. At the state level, industrial hemp is governed by the Department of Agriculture and with some interface with the Department of Environmental Quality, which is now Great Lakes Environment and one other acronym. So, under these two laws, the commercial, each city has the ability to set up, I'm sorry, somebody have a question? I'm sorry. So under these two laws, each city has the ability to make a decision if they're going to allow these businesses to operate in their borders. Under the medical side, you have the section of law that gives the structure for local communities to set up rules for how many businesses will operate, what types of businesses will operate, are there any activities or requirements or goals for diversity, inclusion, community investment, and other local compliance points. And then in the recreational, you have two. One is that sets up the actual local application process for how local communities, if they do allow commercial recreational businesses to function in their cities, what that structure is, and then separately their general rules that they can set up to govern the commercial businesses in the recreational sector. So a few things on what's legal and what's not legal. So because with now the recreational law passing, there's a tremendous amount of confusion as to, well, what can you actually do personally? And those aspects have impact, not just on you as business owners or people that work in businesses, but just as regular citizens. And that can touch into a few areas. So on the what's allowable from a personal vantage point, if you are individually wanting to use marijuana for yourself, or you have a health condition which gives you a medical marijuana card, you can grow 12 plants. You have the ability to have up to 2.5 ounces in your possession. Now, key thing under the medical side, you can't give away to a friend or a family member any of your medical marijuana product, even with recreational. If you're a medical marijuana patient, you can't give anything away. You can't do any gifting. If you're a recreational person, consumer, you could. You can lease property. You can do delivery services through the provisioning center or the retailer or the micro business to customers or patients. And if you have medical, you can only use or purchase with your medical marijuana card. Now, the things that you can't do, you can't consume and drive. You can't smoke or use in a public place unless your city has set up a rule for event licensing, which then if they do set up for event licensing or they set up for consumption facilities, then you could use either at an event or at a facility. But if they don't, then you can't do any use in public. You can't have any visible growing. As I mentioned before, if you're a medical patient, you can't give anything to anybody else. So the rec law does not eliminate the requirement that as a medical patient, you can't give anything away. So gifting is illegal. And then delivery businesses that are not tied to one of the retail licenses for medical, recreational are illegal. And there's a lot of delivery businesses that are set up, but that is illegal. If you're not tied to one of those direct businesses and you're a part of their license.
Good question there.
Yes.
So the way I could get this clear, so if you have a facility, so you could have the license for that facility, but then you could also have a license to deliver?
So if you have a retail store, any one of the retail, there's 3 types, then yes, you could, as a part of your application, in applying to the state that you want to do delivery service to your patients or to your customers. If the state approves you to do that, then it's your business that's doing it. So you're getting the vehicles, you're hiring the staff that's doing it, and everything that takes place has to be detailed in the system. So everything from buying and selling and transporting. If they drive, they have to have a laptop that shows who they're supposed to deliver to, how much they're supposed to deliver, what they're supposed to deliver. There's no freeness in that. You have a lot of rules that you would have to comply to if you're gonna do that. But you can't, and that's a good question because people have asked, well, if I have a delivery company, could a retail establishment contract with me? No. It has to be in the retail establishment's business. They have to own it, it has to be a part of them. They can't contract with anybody at this time. Now, will that change knowing Michigan's legislature? Probably not, because that would have to be something that would change with the legislature, not with the governor.
So then I'm a little bit confused then. So how, someone, let's say that I wanna have a driving, a company, so a delivering company, so then that will prevent me from getting that license?
So, that's a good question. So that is different than a secure transport.
Okay.
So the secure transporter is a individual license where if you have a trucking company and you want to go after being a secure transporter, you apply to the state and your license is going to allow you to transfer or transport product between other licensees. You can't take it to a person. You be able to take it to another licensee.
Okay, that's the
So
difference.
that's a difference. All
And
right.
then, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say too, there's a few things also when it comes to employment and work, and even things such as visitation and childcare. Now, per state law, it's been written into both the medical and the recreational that if you have a medical marijuana card and you have a qualifying health condition, one, you can't be prosecuted for use. You can't have visitation or custody interfered with because you have a medical marijuana card. Now, on the recreational side, that's gray. So on the medical side, you won't have any interference on a state level. But on the recreational side, if you're a recreational user, there's nothing that really speaks to that right now. They're gonna try to address it in the administrative rules, but in reality, since it's not in the law, you don't wanna mess with that. At work, you can't be discriminated against at work because you have a medical marijuana card, but your employer still could test you for marijuana and still could have the ability to fire you if you're high at work. On the recreational side, there's no current protection even from possible discrimination at work. So there are some things that people have to be mindful of from an individual level in terms of if I do use personally or I do use medically, what does that mean for me and how does that impact me? So you want to make sure that you, if you work for somebody, that you have an understanding of what their rules and policies are on use. Hopefully, and now that we're in the 11th, going on 12th year of medical marijuana, companies have become more open to the fact that it is another pharmaceutical product, just like opioids, just like I'm asthmatic, so I take a number of asthma medications. It's a medication just like marijuana. But you want to make sure that you're clear with your work. Yes, Anna?
No, I was just a little bit confused because if as an individual, I would like to have like a, delivering business. What will be the process to start that or to just go ahead and do something like that?
So you're talking about being a secure transport.
A secure transporter.
Okay, and that's why I say you have to it's two separate pieces. The retailer can do delivery to its customers, but that's a part of their business. But the separate standalone, so you apply for license just like you would for any of the others. There's 2 steps with the state. The first step is for you to get a pre-qual, which means that you pass both your background as well as you've demonstrated that you have the financial resources or access to financial resources to be able to be approved. And you don't have any issues, either significant legal issues, court cases, didn't pay taxes, other issues that could be disqualified. Then you go for your step 2 after you've got your step 1 approval, which is your facility license. And that is where they come out, they check your operational plans of how you're gonna conduct business. They check your facility, make sure your facility meets requirements and building code. If you're a secure transporter, they check your vehicles to make sure that your vehicles meet the requirement of Wi-Fi access as well as electronic tablet or some sort of electronic manifest, because those vehicles have to be able to be connected to the state's monitoring system so that they can not only monitor that your vehicle is on the road going from point A to point B to point C, but that they also know what your vehicle is transporting. So they're gonna inspect the vehicles that you use. There's no requirement on the type that you use, so you could use anything from cargo vans or pickup trucks to semi-trucks. And there's no limitation on where you can do business. There's only right now 6 secure transporters servicing the whole state. If you're in the Upper Peninsula and you are a provisioning center and you need to buy from a processor, and there's no processors in the Upper Peninsula, you still need to contract with a secure transporter, and that secure transporter might be in Lansing, that is then going to a processor and picking up with your order and taking it up to you. So depending upon the company, some might use longer haul trucks, some might use short trucks for short inner city runs. So there's a lot of different pieces to it, but it's a viable opportunity.
Eric, is product the only thing you can transport?
Great question, Lloyd. No. Also money. So in the commercial marijuana sector, banking is a challenge, but it is legal. You can do banking. There are some federal guidelines that were set in place in 2014 and 15. It's up to the banks to make that decision. And there's 2 that do in Michigan that we know of for sure, Guard Bank and Live Well Credit Union. But when it comes to making your deposits, you can't go and make your deposits directly to the bank. You have to take it to the Federal Reserve branch. So in Michigan, that would be the branch in Detroit. You take the secure transporter would take the money there for the businesses if they're making their banking deposits, but then also they would do the transport if there's cash or if there's check payment for products. So if you're paying your safety testing lab for testing your product and you're a grower and you're sending them cash, that secure transporter is picking up the cash from you and taking it to them. Or if you're sending them a check, they could pick up the check and drop it off for you.
So you cannot send that check through the mail?
You could, but you may not want to. And the vendor you're working with might not want to. You might want to get it the same day, but it's what you would do. You wouldn't just hop in your car and drive it yourself, because it's a financial transaction and it would need to take place. If it can't be done electronically, then it would need to take place through the secure transport.
So let me ask you this, so as a secure transporter, how much money can someone project to make within the first year of doing that kind of business?
So we're going to get to that a little bit later, but that's a great question. So right now there's only 5 that are doing that business, and so far, based on state data in the first 15 months, the amount of transfers or transit runs between the licensees has topped out at over 170,000 transfer runs.
That's
So-
within a year or just a month?
Well, across the state,
Within a month or
within the past 15 months.
$100,000?
No. Transfer. So the actual logistic run between building A, between license A and license B,
Okay.
over 170,000. Now, depending upon the licensee and how they're charging, some charge by pound, some charge by case that they fill, some charge by mile. But right now, secure transporters, since there's only this limited amount, are making anywhere from 7 to 10 million in year one so far of gross revenue. Doing north of 10 million because there's only 5 safety testing labs. Most of the licensees of the 410 licenses that were approved across the state as of January 10th, outside of those 11, it was 11 at the time because there was 6 secure transporters, 5 testing labs. Everybody else was a grower, processor, or provisioning center. And provisioning centers being the most at about 250. While those businesses, you can be profitable and you can make money, it's also a larger number of people you're competing against. So if you actually wanted to go in with a smaller number of competitors, but also per rules, everybody recreational and medical, everybody has to get their products tested, and everybody has to use a secure transporter in both sides. So as you see here, you've got your growers, your micro businesses, your retailers, even your event people. And that was something that just came out today from the Marijuana Regulatory Agency. If you have an event license and you're doing an event, say at the, what is the Van Arsdale Arena, let's say you're doing a marijuana event there, and you have also a consumption license, so there could be selling of product at the event. But everybody that is going to possibly sell, that's one of these, the retailer or the micro business, they have to use a secure transporter to take the product from their store to the arena. And then any that's left over at the end of the night, they have to use a secure transporter to take it back. So people sleep on those two sectors, but it's basically everybody. It's the brain and the blood vessels of the industry. You can't function without the brain, and that's testing. And you can't function without blood running through the body, and that's the secure transporter.
So how much does it cost to get a secure transporter's license?
So we're gonna get to that. And so, but I did want to just make sure that we go through what these different license types are. And one key thing with these license types, one, if your host city doesn't allow the commercial business in their city, then you can't be licensed in that city. So in both of these, you have cities that have cherry picked and said, okay, we're gonna let provisioning centers, retailers, and micro businesses, and that's it. Or we're gonna let growers and processors, and that's it. You can't force them. Now, you can do a ballot campaign to try to get them to change for both medical and recreational. Those are both legal options. Or you can try to lobby the community. But right now, we've only got 215 that have allowed those businesses to be licensed. These license types, if you can apply for the recreational unless you've already been approved for a medical. Well, we talked to a group last week from Indiana, African American group, that wants to go for a retail and they have been told, well, we could just apply. Nope. You gotta apply for this first, be approved for this, and then once you're approved for this, if the city that you operate in and you're approved in also allows this, then you gotta go through the approval process for that one, for the recreational one. You gotta apply to the state for the step 1 and the step 2, and you gotta apply to the local city. That's another thing, there's no grandfathering in of licenses. So if you've got a medical license, that doesn't guarantee that you would have a recreational. You have to apply for the recreational, and you can be denied for the recreational. You can still keep your medical. And then that's the step 1 and step 2 process. And then that is just another chart showing the different types of licenses that don't require medical right now, and when you can apply without medical after January 6, 2021. Now, fees. So, on the medical side, for this year, this fiscal year, depending upon the license you're applying for, once you're approved with that step 2, now the pre-qualification, you pay a $6,000 fee to the state for your application. When you're approved for one of these, that is your first year license fee. Class A grow, $10,000. Processor, Class C, $56,000. Provisioning center. Now, after that, when it comes time for your renewals, then your renewals are tiered. And there's different criteria that gives what the tiering means. And basically, it's either gross sales or product produced or weight of product produced or amount of product hauled as a secure transporter. The safety testing lab, there's no fee because if the product doesn't pass testing, then it can't be sold. And so that state is, and most states are trying to get people to apply for those. And so that's why that has no fees there. Yes.
So how difficult it is to get like a safety compliance facility then? If there is no fee in one?
So you have to apply. You still have to go through the step 1, you still have to go through the step 2, and you still have to be approved by apply and be approved by your local city.
So how much is the application fee? So you're saying there's no application fee?
No, you still have to pay a $6,000 application fee.
Which-
And you still have to pay a $5,000 application fee to the city that you're applying to operate in as a safety testing lab.
So what if, like, in order for you to become a safety tester for this type of stuff, what kind of background you have to have in order for you to do this?
That's a great question. So,
Yo no voy a vender nada, señores, yo no me estoy preguntando, I'm not selling nothing, just gonna.
so on the step 1 part, because it's looking at your background, your financial capacity, your court history, litigation history, tax payment history, bill payment, and the like, even if you've had challenges, disclosure and being upfront with information, with explanations, can still get people approved. People have been approved with felonies for, say, domestic violence, but they've been approved at the state level for a license, for pre-qualification, because they told them up front. But people were denied when they had the board for parking tickets that became bench warrants because they didn't tell the state. So you want to tell everything, and the state will work with you. They'll work with you more if you're honest than if you try to keep something under. But so in that part, the step 1, that's equal. There's no difference for any license type. Now, when you get to the step 2, the difference for the safety testing lab is the facility type that you're going to have, because you're a lab. So you're getting and you're running up to possibly 140 different types of tests on the marijuana product. So you're going to have laboratory equipment, clean rooms. You're gonna want to, in your business plan, because a business plan is required to be shown to the state for any of the license types, but for the safety testing lab, you're gonna wanna show that you're going to either already have persons that have a background in laboratory science or testing, or that you're gonna hire those folks, and how you're gonna have them manage or be responsible. And then you're gonna wanna hire them before you get to the end of your step 2 approval, because when the state comes out and inspects your facility to give you the sign off that your building meets requirements, they're gonna also wanna see the staff that are gonna be a part of leading your business. So getting somebody, you don't have to have them to start with day one when you start the application process, but you damn sure gotta have them by the time you get to the end. Or you could run the risk of the state saying, we don't think you have the technical team to help you do the work. And then it's the same on the recreational side. Step 1 is the same. The only difference between recreational and medical is the amount of disclosure in terms of financial information and the number of years of taxes that you have to show in terms of that. Everything else, though, is the same. That's another thing people miss. The rules, it's 2 cars. You learn how to drive car A, then you gotta learn how to drive car B. But there is a difference, though, in the licensing fees, because on the recreational side, the licensing fees are lower. Now, another thing, but they do have this sliding scale based on, similar to the medical. And there's one thing else in regards to you still would have to pay the $6,000 fee to apply for recreational. You still would have to pay the $5,000 fee to the local city that you're gonna operate in to get their approval. And then if you're approved, then you pay this. Now, people have asked the question, if I got a medical license as a grower, and I want to then go for recreational, if I'm approved for the recreational, can I just let go of the medical? No. Right now, you gotta keep both. So, that means you have to pay separate application and separate fees for if you're a Class C, and then if you were on the other one, oops, oh, never mind. If you were the Class C on the other one is $56,000. Yes.
Would it be the same even if you're just like a simple caregiver? Do you have to opt out of being a caregiver before signing for recreational?
So that's another great question. So on the recreational side, because these license types require you to already have a medical license, and because in the medical license, if you're a caregiver, you have to relinquish your caregiving card or caregiving rights to apply, then yes. For the Class A grower right now, you don't have to at the time of application, but you will have to at the time of approval.
Okay.
So you get a little bit more time on the recreational side to keep being a caregiver. But when you finally get to that stage and they're ready to approve you, you then do have to let that go.
So how would you be aware of being approved? Like, would it be once you're approved, then you go to the online and opt out for being a caregiver, or do you opt out before you get approved?
You know, I like you. I'm so glad you asked that question. Because this is where the importance of, if you're pursuing a license, you need to have people that understand the process, the local process and the state process, that will work with you to help you understand timelines, the communication requirements, pushing or trying to get movement on your application, all of those nuts and bolts. Because if you do it just yourself, and there's a lot of folks that have tried to do it themselves, they've either been denied because they made simple mistakes in their application, or they forgot to admit something that they may have forgotten that was 20, 30, 40 years old, but it showed up on their background check. Or they didn't know when exactly they needed to let go of their caregiving card, which would be, because the state will let you know as an applicant as you're moving through. So when you get to step 2, there's 3 phases. And they will let you know as you pass each phase, getting up to the final inspection. So you'd want to do it before phase 3. So really between the notice that you passed the second level on step 2 and before they give you the notice that you passed the third level on in step 2.
So between 1 and 2 of the,
Between 2 and 3 of step 2.
okay.
Because like I say, when you're in step 2, there's 4 review phases. But that's why you gotta have somebody. That's what we do professionally. There's other folks that do similar work. You want to have somebody though that is, one, honest with you about the process and gives you that constant information so that you're aware fully, okay, this is what's gonna really happen. And I know how to plan for things. I know how to plan, because like we mentioned, you don't have to have all your staff immediately when you apply. You don't even have to have all the money that you may need to show to build into when you start the process, but you need to know timelines of when you need to start having certain milestones hit so that you can be prepared and meet the requirements that the state and that local city are gonna look for.
And then this is just also for just when it says and ending September 30th, are prices going to change for the next beginning?
Fiscal year, yes. So we operate on fiscal years, so the state sets the requirements. So when we get closer to September of 2020, for both medical and recreational, the state will give an update on what the license fees will be once you're approved. Because this is at the approval part. The part for the local license fee, the state application fee, and then the annual renewal fee, those are static, so those never change. Now, there's ranges on permitting costs depending upon the type of license you're applying for and the building requirements that you're gonna have to meet. And we list some of those requirements that you would have to get permits for. And it depends on the city, how much the city may charge and how much the state would charge for the license that you're pursuing. So the size of the market right now, per what we've projected, once the medical side is fully up to speed with the full complement of needed growers, processors, and provisioning centers, and the amount of patients that exist, that the market could be anywhere from realistically between 850 million to 1.04 million, a billion in
That's what that
market
means.
size, yes. We're not gonna hit that anymore, so that one is out. Then on the individual side, for adult use, this is where the amount of potential customers across the state, based on CDC data of adult use, and then if the average person is spending $127 a month, or if they're spending $146 a month at a retailer, so 1.4 to 1.6 billion. Which gets to something we talked about when I did the radio show with Anna and Manuel about not just licensing, but also vendor and supplier opportunities. Because every one of the businesses that's licensed on the medical or recreational side is going to use and uses vendors to provide services for them. I'm gonna jump ahead to all right. I'm gonna come back to those slides I went past, but I think that this is important because to be a vendor or a supplier to one of these businesses, you don't have to go through licensing approval at the state level. You have to know that these licensees need these services and that they are able to buy legally equipment, software, security, legal services, construction. They can buy those legally. You don't have to be, if you have a construction firm or you have a security firm, you don't have to be licensed yourself to have a contract with someone that's licensed business or going through licensing. And so you got the direct supplier opportunity, and then you also have the ancillary services. So that can be insurance, media, professional training, office furniture, because they need furniture, they need equipment. So packaging and supplies. So the average licensee uses between 40 to 70 vendors to provide service to them every year. So that means that if at the top end, the industry is generating on the medical side, 850 million, on the recreational side, 1.4 billion, that means spending downstream with vendors, after you take out human resources and capital costs, could be anywhere from, on the medical side, external vendor spending could be 350 to 400 million, and on the recreational side, anywhere from 600 to 700 million of spending with vendors that are outside of the licensing pool, but are the vendors and suppliers that you need to keep the business running.
So on the professional training and educational piece, what will something like that look like?
That's a great question. So the state and the cities require that you have training programs built in to your application so that you're training your employees on the operations of the work that you do, that you're also training them on security and diversion, that you're training them, if it's a retailer, on substance abuse prevention. And so hiring companies that do professional development training, that come in and teach workers how to do certain things, be it if it's directly dealing with the plant or if it's dealing with just basic work rules, safety and security. Those are requirements for all of the license types. So being contracted with, and there are a lot of companies, Michigan, because we're just now in the commercial sector, you don't hear that much about companies, but there are a lot of companies in other states that are contracted to do employee training, management training, professional development training. That's a critical service. Accounting, legal, all of those.
And what does the real estate looks like?
Another great question. Real estate is king in this industry because the communities that do allow it in a state like Michigan, which is an uncapped local control market, no cap of how many licenses you can allow across the state, it's up to each local city. And then each city sets the zoning rules. The only rules that are built in on the state level are micro businesses, growers have to be in industrial, agricultural zone land, and on the retail side, recreational retailers and micro businesses and other licensees have to be 1,000 feet away from a school unless the city says otherwise. So zoning is all controlled by the city, and as we see here in Grand Rapids, there, and in a lot of cities, most of the areas where you would think you could, you can't because of zoning rules. So real estate, in terms of finding and converting on properties that people would want and need for being able to go for licensing, and the escalation of prices is just out of this world. Some parcels in Grand Rapids went from, blew up easily. I'll give you one example. There was property on Leonard Street, one of our clients pursued, that was originally selling for 130, 140,000. They ended up getting it, but it was over 400,000 to purchase it on Leonard Street. Muskegon is another example. They took a whole area that was a former industrial area, and in 3 months after they approved medical marijuana, 21 of the properties sold for a net of 6.2 million. So if you were a real estate agent,
The commission.
was pretty nice. So that's huge.
So how can we get a real estate agent to really learn, you know, as much information as possible so he could actually have the upper hand in identifying these properties and present it to these potential customers?
So that's a great question. So there's two things that we would suggest. One is from exposing business owners like real estate agents or security companies or other companies or lawyers or anybody to the opportunities, having more of these. This needs to be a consistent thing of bringing the awareness that you all are one of the few as an organization that's doing this. Secondly, though, putting together either continuing workshops or the businesses hiring groups like us to help them understand how to become suppliers and vendors to this industry. Because it's kind of similar to any other established industry like automotive or healthcare or energy, where you're trying to get small businesses, minority businesses, you have to kind of teach them what are the rules and requirements and the ways to get engaged. The other thing is on the local level, when I talk about the local rules, local communities like Grand Rapids and a few others are trying to get these businesses to do business with local businesses. So doing, from a city level, matchmaking events and vendor education events where they're bringing the licensees to meet the potential vendors. And we need voices like you all to be a part of that, saying, yeah, if you're gonna approve 20 or 25 in the city, those 25 need to be over at the convention center doing a procurement fair so that they can let us know what they need and we can introduce them to what we can sell to them. And it needs to be consistent.
I think you had a question.
You got a question?
Yeah, do you have to own the building for sure?
Another great question. So one of the things that we had in an earlier slide in terms of what's legal is you can lease property. So if the owner's willing to lease, as a licensee, you can lease. And the state, that's allowable from the state vantage point.
So
And the real estate person, if they're doing that, the real estate fees in terms of commissions. But yes, as a licensee, you can either buy or you can lease. A lot of owners aren't necessarily willing to do leasing, but there are some that do, and that creates an opportunity. But even now, the prices go up because of the risk that some people associate with doing business with this industry.
I guess my other question would just be then, would you need the building before applying or already having like the idea of the building, where it's at and whatnot?
So another great question. So when you apply to the state for your step one, no. You can get your step one approval at the state, what city you want to operate in. But when you get ready to apply for your step two, that's when you have to have the building and the city you want to operate in. That city has to allow the business type that you're going for to operate in this borders and have zoning laws that allow you to be able to get licensed in their city. As long as that's set up, then yes, then you'll have to have the building. Now, when you apply to the city for approval, you have to show that you have control of the building either through a lease or a letter of intent on the leasing side or a purchase agreement on the purchase side. You don't have to have it built out, but you have to show how you're going to develop it. But then when it comes time for the final inspection with your state step two, you have to have it built out. So you have to then go on ahead between the city can approve you with showing control and your plans, but then when it comes time for the state to give you that final approval, you have to have it built out, the city has to give you your certificate of occupancy, and then they'll come out, do the inspection, and say if you pass or fail. If you fail, they'll give you an opportunity, though, usually to correct whatever error in place. Yes, sir.
Just to, I think, to answer Arnold's question, the zoning was already predetermined which area you can have the business. Also, the contingency, if you're close to a church, if you're close to a daycare, what needs to be done. So the city already, at least in this area, already predetermined where you can have the location for a retail.
Correct. And so, a few things. Yes, not just for retail, but for all of the license types. And that's what the city's going to do. One of the things that our clients hire us to do for them that are pursuing licenses is to work with that city on how they're going to set up their rules locally. How they're gonna set up zoning, what the requirements are gonna be for that particular community. Are they going to have some sort of economic inclusion or opportunity or community investment programming in their ordinance? Some people call it social equity. That's limiting. It's really economic opportunity, employment opportunity, and community investment. And you can do it in both the medical and recreational side. So our clients have us work with communities to do that. And in some communities, hire companies like us to help them develop their ordinance. So to the point, even once a city has adopted and say, these are the areas that we're zoning, everything can always be amended. We just have to spend the time lobbying and presenting the business case as to why some things should be amended, but you can make amendments even after.
Question, Eric. So for the transporter, license, you have to have a location as well, or can you just do it out of your house?
Oh, that's another great question. So you have to have a location. Yep, so you have to have a location because the secure transporter, you have to have somewhere that the trucks are gonna be stored. You can also hold product for up to 48 hours, depending upon, and sometimes that makes sense because if you're doing, say, your clients are the ones that are in the Upper Peninsula, and they all have orders that are becoming available around the same time, you may not wanna just make a whole bunch of one-off trips. You may want to get the collection of those orders all picked up from the growers and processors, and then take it all up at one time and drop it off to everybody you're gonna drop it off to. In that case, then you need to hold it at a facility in storage for a day to get everything in. So if you get everything on Monday, you get half of it on Monday, half of it on Tuesday, then you can take it up on Wednesday. I know you had a question, sir.
I guess you already answered. So you have to be a resident for wherever the business is gonna be set up, or that can be done in any city?
Great question. No, you don't have to be a resident. Now, some cities do give preferences in the application to residents or people that can prove residency in terms of prioritizing who they're gonna review first or how they're going to maybe put people into a lottery, but it's not a mandatory requirement. So no, you don't have to live in the city. Matter of fact, you don't have to live in the state. On the medical side and on the recreational side, for after December 6, 2021, anybody in-state, out-of-state can apply before December 6, 2021. You either have to be a Michigan resident or have already gotten a medical license. Now, this is what we, based on data, project that the average revenue and gross profit, net profit margin are for in year 1 and year 2 for provisioning centers, growers and processors, safety testing, and secure transporters. and what they would look like in terms of revenue and growth. Oh, wait a minute. I'm sorry. So the first 15 months on the medical side for sales, you had roughly 299 million in sales during the first 15 months. And that's with the challenges that we have right now in the supply chain in terms of lack of enough growers and processors. Right now, we're only producing roughly 14% of the medical marijuana demand. So the amount of product that the medical marijuana patients need, the current licensees are only able to meet 14% of that demand. So there's still 86% demand that can be met by new licensees on the medical side, and that has nothing to do with the recreational side. What recreational has been able to generate actually takes from that 14% on the medical. So that's just, like I say, the first 15 months. And a few key stats in terms of the product types, the amount of sales per type, and the unit price per pound or fluid ounces sold. Then for the provisioning center side, so during the first 15 months, this was the amount of gross sales per month and the amount of provisioning centers. So if you just do an average, then the average provisioning center in the first 15 months made over $3 million in gross sales. But you have to figure that those who have been here early in the process, of course, are generating more and a greater share of the individual revenue. Now, the state doesn't report out individual revenue by licensee, so you have to make value assumptions of what a provisioning center is making. But as you can see, now, one of the reasons why there's been a dip here is because, not so much because of the recreational that came online in December, but because of production. November and December, there were huge problems in the production chain at the grower level. There's 4 stages of growing that you have to report to the state. In the month of December, 97% of the plants in the 4 stages had to be destroyed before they got to harvesting and then sending off for testing. And that's a combination of poor plant genetics, poor manufacturing skills, because you are manufacturing. It's a plant, but you're manufacturing this plant. And poor construction of your facility so that pollen or dust mites or other things that contaminate the plant ended up affecting crops.
Eric, question from Facebook. How can I get an advertising contract? Are providers able to do that now on the radio? Another vendor opportunity.
All right, so that's a great question. So there's limitations, there are restrictions on the advertising, but you can do general advertising about the business. Now, you can't go into the products that you're offering, but you can do general advertising that we're here and we've been here such a certain amount of time. And as long as you're compliant with state statute and administrative rules and what you communicate in your advertising, yes, a provisioning center, which are usually the ones that are doing the advertising, would be able to do. Now, the other licensees, and this is one thing we would suggest and recommend, if somebody is a grower, you're not going to want to just do word of mouth and go to the industry shows. You're going to want to come up with strategies to do advertising so that the provisioning center in Marquette, Michigan, the provisioning center in Detroit, the provisioning center in Bay City knows that you're in Grand Rapids and you could provide them with tested, ready to go marijuana product. So part of that is, if you're the company, is finding who those entities are and sitting down and presenting yourselves and looking at the laws of what the state requires on advertising. As long as you can craft advertising campaigns that meet the state requirements, and go out and pitch your services. Sell away. Yes.
Just because you touched on the next question I wanted to ask, when you test your product, obviously, how much do you get tested? Everything you want to sell, or just a none from the main thing you want to sell? Or how does that go?
So that's another great question. I don't know the exact quantity number in terms of the percentage, but it is, you send out a sample. So you may, if you harvest, say, 50 plants, you'll send out a specific sample, and it's usually a specific weight.
Okay.
Amount.
A ratio. Okay.
That you send out to the testing lab for testing. I wish I knew it off memory, I do apologize, but we'll get that answer out. And then if it passes, then you can move the plant to the next stage. If it fails, everything that was attached, all 50, have to be destroyed. Now, there is an opportunity possibly, depending upon why you fail, in both the medical and the recreational law, for what's called remediation, where you could possibly save the plant and save the batch. So think of it as emergency surgery. So you're trying to go in, and based on the requirements, if it's possible, you may put that plant on the table and see if you can save it. And then send it out for testing to see if it meets the standard at that point. Now, if it fails a second time, then you gotta call it and call the date and time of death, unfortunately, for that plant. Yes.
So you say there's 5 transporters in the state, and they also can transport money. Are those just the big companies that we know that are doing it?
No, so these are Michigan-based groups. Here's what's funny about this. When looking at this, we actually did sales outreach to out-of-state companies just to see if they were interested. As a company, we're trying to find people to work with. And if they were in Colorado or they were in Nevada, they actually weren't interested. I think there's one out-of-state company that's been looking at pursuing a license for a secure transporter, but the majority of companies are Michigan-based companies. Now, as far as we're aware, none of those companies are owned by people of color. And none of the safety testing labs are, as far as we're aware of. That's another piece about the industry, both as suppliers and as owners. Companies that look like us at Banks & Company, we're one of the few. There needs to be more. We need more in, and events like this are a part of getting more in to either provide services or getting people to apply.
So then in order for you to become a secure transporter, how much money do you actually need?
So that's another great question. You could potentially in year one, in terms of expenses, you could, to get everything that's necessary, including equipment, vehicles, do your outfitting, your headquarters, staffing, you could spend anywhere from 1.3 to 2.1 million in expenses, separate of what you could generate in revenue. Now, each situation is unique based on what someone may have in their arsenal. So let's say if you're currently doing transportation, let's say you're a medical transporter and you already have vehicles and have the ability to possibly repurpose part of your fleet, then that might reduce your costs. If you have a facility that you could build out to meet requirements, it's already in a zoned area, that reduces your outlay because you don't have to go find and purchase a property. So no two situations are the same, but there's some generalities of possible expenses that you would look at.
Yeah, but then, that's a huge concern, because when we are looking, at least for us people of color, to come up with 1.2, it's not an easy task.
And so that's why honestly, one thing we did in the slide, we did not in the presentation, we didn't put that slide in there because too many times when we've had forums like this, regardless of the audience, people see that projected first year expenditure and they stop at, I need to have that all up front. And they don't.
Okay.
And we don't want people to stop there. We have clients that have started with just the husband, the wife, some money in their bank account, and they're going through the process. They've gotten their pre-qual, they've laid out business plans, they've got investors, they're building towards being that larger entity that's licensed. They didn't stop at that number because they know they don't need that day one. So that's where people have to just be patently honest, because we have talked to in Grand Rapids and a lot of the communities, especially on the western side of the state, the elected officials have been really, really good. I'm talking to you, southeastern Michigan. The elected officials have been really good at advocating and pushing people of color to at least go after licensing, but we have stopped ourselves. We've had so many folks that have gotten stuck on different activity points. We've had people that said, no matter how much I make and no matter how much net profit I make, I don't want to pay a $56,000 annual license fee. I don't have to pay that in my other businesses. I don't care if I make $5 million net profit. If I got to pay that fee, I don't want to do it. Or why do we have to go through the detailed financial background check? Or why do we have to go through the criminal background check? I don't want to do that. Or I see that number of what the business would have to spend based on value estimates during year one, and I stick myself at, I gotta have that all today. Those are things that become I won't even say self-defeating, self-segregating, because it's basically you're creating unanswerable questions that can't be answered. And we've even had that. Sometimes people say, well, I need certain, what word we had, and then I'll let you. They say, well, if we start and we're doing good the first 3 years, and then in year 4 we start to struggle, what do we do then? We can't answer that question for you. But they talked themselves out of it because they were like, if we can't get an answer to what we do in year 4, we're not going to do it. There's nothing you can do with that.
So Anna, go ahead.
So then, and I see where you're coming from, Eric, but realistically speaking then, if someone is thinking about going into the transporter, getting the transporter's license, and they have $2,500 in their account, what's next?
So what's next is getting with people, partnering with folks. Don't try to do this yourself.
Okay.
Partner with 10, 15 people, family members, friends. Have organizations like the chamber here, demand in your cities that the organizations organize events to get people together to go after these licenses. Because you can't do it by yourself. So no, you don't even have to have a conversation if your goal is, I don't want to do it for anybody else, just me. Well, you've already created an unanswerable question. But if you're willing to get in a room, and maybe your expertise is, you may not have the money, but your expertise is logistics management. And someone else has money, and someone else has vehicles. Now y'all get together, now y'all can do something. Now y'all have an opportunity, but you've got to be willing to do that and pursue that, and not let, like I said, certain data points be the stop, because you don't have to have all of that day one. But you have to have a willingness to partner, a willingness to expand your team, and talk to folks outside of your circle who understand this process that can be of help.
So then if you have a group of maybe 10 people that you know, and you guys wanna come in together, so then, for the first process, it's like, you said between $5,000 to $6,000?
So in all reality, because it would be better to have them come together and then have them sit down with someone that can walk them through those points in detail versus trying to go through check by check by check. And the only reason I say that is because in that hypothetical scenario, we don't know what that group has in terms of resources, talent, expertise, relationships that could be funding, support, other things. But the first step is getting them together and then getting them to places like this, or having them sit down with companies like Banks and Company to say, we're together, we want to do this, how? How do we do this?
So at that point, do you guys help them put together like a MOU of some sort, a memorandum of understanding, making sure that everything is gonna be divided accordingly and all that kind of stuff? Is that something that you guys do?
Anna, we vendor out services as well as a company, but you can do a one-stop with us because we'll have attorneys on standby, create the organization, create the bylaws, your operating agreement, all of those things. We can help a group like that do that. Talk about who's bringing what to the table, what percentage is this person going to get. That's what an attorney can do, all of that from a legal perspective.
But yeah, we would help coordinate.
Correct.
To make sure that they also are speaking to them in the language of compliance and approval. Yes.
As long, teaming up with someone else on the MRA application, you also have to have them on the application fee, and they have to go, like they have the applicant, I was reading, something applicant under the name.
Supplemental applicant.
Okay.
So that's a great question. So here's a wrinkle that came out in the end of 2018 from the state level. No, actually it was 2019, was it, or 18?
18.
2018.
Mm-hmm.
So it was Senate Bill 1265, which amended the applicant process so that if an applicant has less than a 10% stake in the equity ownership and they don't have any control, managerial control, you do list them on the application, but they don't have to go through the background check, the financial check, those checkpoints. The reason why the state did that was to create a vehicle for applicants to be able to get equity investors and partners who might be willing to come on for 5%, 6%, 7%, but don't want to have to go through the tie-up of having to be vetted equally like someone that's got 25%. The other thing and reason for doing that was a state with some applicants, and they said this, there was one applicant, I think Andrew Briscoe told us about, that had over 150 individual owners. And before that law was passed, they had to review and vet every single person, even the ones that had 0.3%. It didn't make sense. So, because there was only a small number that had more than 10%. So, the state has gotten better at doing pragmatic things like that. So then that creates opportunities twofold. It can create opportunities for communities to, and I make mention of something that we worked on with Grand Rapids, it's Marijuana Industry Voluntary Economic Development Agreement. And one of the things that was built into that when it was passed in September of 2018 was to have a target goal of a minimum of 25% local demonstrated ownership from people that live in Grand Rapids, and it had priority ranking. So it was live in Grand Rapids and live in a HUD specific target area, which would be your areas where you have economic disadvantage and other socioeconomic disadvantages. Grand Rapids resident, Kent County resident, and or resident of the state of Michigan. So what a few companies did in that framework was they did seek out and find partners to work with that maybe they were from Lansing, but they found Grand Rapids partners that they could work with, and because of the 10% rule, were able to add them in to the application, because also they then had to add them on to the state application. So now they're not just demonstrated for local, but they're also